Here's where we are in Florida as the LGBTQ plus community after the 2022 Florida legislative session. These seem to be facts. Let's see. I believe these are facts. There was not an issue of gay gender or identity being a focus in K to 3rd grade. There was not critical race education being taught in our schools. But that did not stop Governor Ron Desantis and radical conservatives to create solutions to problems that did not exist. In the name of parental rights and protecting children against LGBTQ, they introduced Don't Say Gay, the Stop Woke Act, discussed anti-LGBTQ health bills, and more. Disney at first did not weigh in. Then Disney was protested. Now Disney has declared war on anti-LGBTQ legislation in Florida. DeSantis declares Disney as woke. And now everyone from European capitals, the U.S. business community, media outlets, and even the Oscars have made Florida a national laughingstock. Finally, even DeSantis' press secretary weighed in by suggesting that if you opposed Don't Say Gay, you were really a groomer, and that is code for being a pedophile against Florida's children. So let's start with the big picture. Let's examine the legislative session itself and discover what the hell is going on in Tallahassee. Anybody got a simple answer to that question?
Well, the short version is it's horrific, it's brutal, it makes no sense, it doesn't match where people are, where Floridians are. This is a legislature and a governor that's focused on legislating to a very small and shrinking white, straight Christian minority in the country, because that's the base, but unfortunately that's the base that gets them elected. And that's what this session was all about.
Do you agree with that, Nathan?
I do. I think about how we serve our community outside of those, what should have been 60 days. They extended because they weren't able to accomplish the one priority, which is a budget within that time frame. So as a representative of a state agency, one of the biggest things we can do is build trust and serve our community, all Floridians. And this makes it incredibly difficult to do that because it's out of touch with really what our state and what our communities want and need, frankly.
First thoughts, Faye?
Madness. That's what I think is going on there. I feel like we're being erased. I feel like we're slowly being erased. And you know, those voiceless people, their voices are getting lower and more silent. It's heartbreaking.
This attempt in this legislative session, as I open the show for Queer News Tonight, suggests that this is an attack unlike probably anything that we've seen in our lifetimes. I remember, for the sake of discussion, I'll be the only one that remembers Anita Bryant. Wink, wink, Stephen. But even since those days, we didn't see anything like this. I mean, this is national and international news. Every side possible is weighing in. We're going to discuss Disney and what Disney did and didn't do, etc. When we look at this legislative session of the 63 days, was it designed to get people elected? Is this the way that Governor DeSantis is going to be forever remembered as launching his presidential campaign in 2024? And even if he loses, perhaps 2028, is that what's going on here? Or is this just purely hate for the sake of hate?
I think it's a little bit of both. They win by, to misquote a misquote of George W. Bush, by making the pie smaller. They are legislating very specific positions targeted at very specific constituencies because they can. And that was a line from Representative Fine last session. Why are you doing this? Because we can. This is virtue signaling on behalf of the governor and the legislature right behind it. Florida's Republican legislature would love to see Ron DeSantis as president. It would be good for them. And that's what this session is all about. But again, there's no overwhelming support for all of these bills, whatever they are, except among their very specific small constituencies.
When you say that, does that mean that ultimately they will be successful at what they're trying to do, or they will not be successful?
Well, there's lots of litigation coming, and I think others can speak better to that than I can. In the public perception, I think that's where a lot of these cases are won or lost. I think certainly with Don't Say Gay, that has been one of the few cases where our side, the Democratic side, the side of right actually, was able to frame the issue, frame the message, and create a groundswell of support, not just here in Florida, but around the country, as you said. But with other bills, that's tougher.
Well, let's talk about the other big bill. We're gonna get into the specifics of it. So let's talk about it from a legislative session standpoint. Other attempts in terms of woke, critical race theory, trans health, etc. The goal seems to be broad and broader than what we first we thought. Nathan, you've watched from your seat as a leading trans activist, the trans community be targeted left and right by the state of Florida. But this seems to go well beyond just targeting trans. Well, first off, and as it relates to trans, how do you think the trans community survived the 63 days of legislative session?
Yeah, so Al, I checked in with a lot of community members on Monday after the signing in Pasco County. And folks are hurting. There were a lot of community members that turned the channel in listening to the governor and other speakers' remarks that day. The same happened during session, whether it was at committee hearings or on the House or Senate floor. There were things said. I respect very much the position that I have been privileged to hold. As a Floridian, born and raised, I've been educated in this state. The trust placed in us as public servants in whatever role we have is phenomenal. And there were gut punches day after day, week after week, and with some communication. And there were offers made by the students that came to meet, to talk, to educate, to have folks get to know them as constituents. And bill sponsors weren't willing to meet with them, unfortunately. And that part's heartbreaking. But we are absolutely an amazingly resilient community, and we're supporting one another right now. But a lot of folks are healing.
A lot of people that I check in, certainly in the last month. I mean, in Queer News Tonight, this has been obviously a dominant story. Queer News Tonight is not only followed in South Florida and Florida, but around the nation and really English-speaking world. We continue to report on what's going on in Florida, and I have to say that in general, I feel a lot of apathy in our community. That contrary to the observation that you made as an activist, I'm an activist, but not in the way that you are or the way you are, that the LGBTQ community or large portions of it didn't come in the complete ways that we think that they should to change this. If we're going to change judges, we have to elect officials. If we are going to elect officials, we have to turn out at the voting polls. If we're going to turn out at voting polls, we have to register. What do you think about that? That we're not, as a community, doing enough to fight what we just watched in this legislative session?
Well, I think most marginalized members of the LGBTQ community feel that way. Women have felt that. Black and brown community members feel that way. Trans folks feel that way, without question. This session collectively highlighted all of the issues we are all confronting. And I will say consistently, as someone that does education and outreach, our agency is the lead consumer protection agency. What we're trying to prevent is fraud and discrimination. It is really hard to do that when we don't connect with community members. I think collectively we saw voices come together in protest in communities or in Tallahassee to let their voices be heard in a way that I've never seen before. So while I say there's education to do, I also saw collectiveness that I don't know that I've ever seen in Florida. I mean,
and Stephen, to the point with you, you represent the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus, so you're really the tip of the sword in terms of trying to galvanize the Florida LGBTQ community to get out and make a difference. What do you think about this, that maybe our community is not doing enough to respond to what we saw at this legislative session?
Sure. We know that's always a challenge, is how you keep the momentum going, how you keep the energy up. And look, we've just come through 4 years of Trump, 2 years of COVID. Everyone's exhausted. And you hate to say that, but that is just the reality. Part of the challenge, I think, is Our community is now engaged because now they see what's on the line. They see what's at stake. They see this as 2 sessions in a row where we're under fire. And what gives me more hope than anything else there, quite frankly, Al, is looking at not only our community, but also some of our allies, particularly the young people. The young people were incredibly active in the 2018 election, which we came closer than we ever had in a lot of elections that year. We actually won the statewide race for the first time in a dozen years. And they're coming out now. They're coming out in support. They're coming out of the schools. They're marching. They are driving this. And I think we've tapped into them as a resource because they're either with us, they're part of our community, or they're allies. And they see this as a civil rights issue that it really is. That's what gives me hope about this session, this election, and where we go from here.
And Faye, I want to fold you in from the standpoint of being a woman. You were at Tampa Pride
Yes, I was.
last weekend.
80,000
and,
strong.
Yeah, it was an amazing event. I watched lots of the stuff related to it. Nikki Fried, our Secretary of Agriculture, the only cabinet post to ever have appointed an LGBT representation for a cabinet post, of which Nathan represents. She was very clear in Tampa last weekend of trying to summarize what she watched in the legislative session to basically say they're trying to other us, and that they're creating a process of creating an enemy that is other than us. And de facto, I believe, without putting any words in Commissioner Fried's mouth, she was trying to say that it is basically older white men that are creating boogeymen. And the boogeymen in this instance are LGBTQ people. When you were in Tampa, what did you think about what Nikki Fried
I love Nikki Fried, by the way. She's just an exceptional human being. All this stuff is scary when it comes to being a woman. I mean, we've had to deal with these kind of marginalized situations for many, many moons. I have to think about Women's International Month, which was last month, where, initially all the history was written by old white men, and women were part of that history. And we had to riot and scream very bloody murder to be acknowledged and to be given that month. I feel that we're at that same crossroads when it comes to LGBTQ. We've got to be louder. We've got to do more. We're not doing enough. The reality is that when I'm posting something about don't say gay, and I have LGBTQ friends inboxing me, not knowing what the hell we're talking about, is surprising. There's a lot of people that until their marriage rights are completely taken away from under them, that they will not be standing with us to fight this fight.
Wow. Well, as we start, we're just rolling into this in terms of trying to summarize what we've watched in the 63 days of this legislative session in Florida, because as we begin, this is what the state is setting up. They're setting up what's going to happen in November. They're setting up what's going to happen in the next number of years leading into the 24 presidential rotation. And unfortunately, for all of you that are not in the state of Florida and you make the jokes, gosh, I'm so glad I don't live in Florida. Oh, wait. They're coming for you.
You're next.
Too.
You're
just
next.
That's all it is, because it's a plan. It seems to be a plan. We reported yesterday at Queer News Tonight that 15 additional states now have very, very similar laws to Don't Say Gay. And they're being cranked out on the old-fashioned mimeograph machine and said, just insert state name here and initiate your new law. Well, let's move beyond just the broad discussion of the legislative session and get into some of the very specifics. Let's discuss the major pieces of legislation that were propelled against the LGBTQ community during this Florida legislative session. We are joined by some of the top voices in the fight against what we all watched, and we'll continue to rotate everyone in as we have them, but I'm going to do the introduction. Joining our guest dream team is Florida's first Latino LGBTQ state representative. Before I do that full introduction, watch this.
This law does not solve any problems that currently exist. Instead, House Bill 1557 has been weaponized by the governor's office to launch a bigoted smear campaign.
Well, somebody I watched closely in these 63 days of legislative session from Central Florida, my own home ground at the University of Central Florida, is Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith. And I'm not sure he's with us. Oh, he is.
There he is.
You are. Representative Smith.
I
Thank you
am.
for joining Queer News tonight. And welcome. To
Thank you for having me, Al.
Yeah, we're going
Can you
to
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Everything's great. Let me add some of our Dream Team members along with us. I'm going to production. I'm going to fold Senator Chevron Jones back in. He's been able to join us now, and he is actually in studio. And Senator Jones, your camera's right there in front of you, straight ahead. And have you done MSNBC or CNN lately? Welcome to Queer News Tonight. Our hometown first ever LGBTQ state senator, and we're going to fold Senator Jones in a moment. And we continue with more of our Dream Team, and this is Florida's first lesbian woman of color, LGBTQ plus state representative. Let us show you a little of this. Watch this.
Thinking about the children, especially Black and brown children, who are going to be the hardest hit by this bill. We understand that in our communities, we're still dealing with the idea of sexuality and gender orientation, or sexual orientation rather, and gender identity.
As soon as we have Representative Michelle Rayner, we'll fold her into the conversation. Oh, we have Michelle. I know we have a time crunch. Good evening, Representative Rayner. And going to continue, finally, the LGBTQ plus community's Dream Team needs allies. And we don't talk about this nearly enough, do we? Watch this.
It's very frustrating, and it's super hard to be in this chamber and to be cool with people and cordial with people who are making policies that are detrimental to our communities.
Well, of course, straight ally in the State House is State Representative Angie Nixon. And Senator Nixon, good evening and welcome to Queer News Tonight. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBT